All right, so we go back inside, and they're doing their strikes. They're using their strikes, and they go through it. It's like a draft. You know, this person gets the paper they pick for over to the other side, and then they're finished, and all of a sudden there's a sidebar. And then the jury, you know, they're sidebarring over there for quite some time, and then they decide to let the jury go use the bathroom. And then they decide to take the defendants out of the courtroom and put them into the other room. And then they decide that we're going to have to, the prosecution claims that there is a gender bias with our jury, and there is a race bias with our jury. They say this is the exact same number of male to females as the jury last time. And so now we have to go through and explain every single person they striked off that jury, one by one. I thought that those strikes, you didn't have to explain that. And then they keep coming back to one juror. They keep going back and forth and coming back to 296. And it seems to me that 296 is the government's ringer, and they're going to get they're going to get that person who's a male, right?
Yeah,
a young male back onto the jury. And, you know, they're going through and they're like, well, we understand this one. Aren't these strikes supposed to be for any reason? And they're saying, well, I had a gut feeling that this gentleman wasn't telling the entire truth. And they're saying, well, a gut feeling is not a good enough reason. Aren't our strikes? Why do we need to give a reason for our strikes? Why did the defendants get taken into the back room? Oh, and then while the defendants are in the back room, they're screaming, water, water, we need water back there. And then the marshals come and get the water. And then finally the marshals come out and they're like, can we bring them back? This is taking a very long time. As we go through, so right now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different people that they're still looking at, 5 out of 14. Almost 20 minutes left, and she's decided that she's going to go and look onto her computer where she can see things a little better,
or make a phone
call and find out exactly how she's supposed to explain this off so that she doesn't get in trouble and she can do whatever she wants to do in there. Have you ever had to explain why you're striking a person off the jury? And then they say, oh, there's a gender bias and a racial bias? There's a gender bias against males. So they want to have to explain. And what is it, 8 to 4? 8 males to 4 women. But there's a gender bias, and then there's also a racial bias, and then we end with 5 people, only 3 of those go to the gender bias and 2 of them go to the racial bias, and there's good explanations for all of these. So what exactly is going on here?
Why don't you mention also about the disparity in the notes from the prosecution to the defense, where they're completely opposite of each other, and yet I'll let you take
Okay, so they're arguing back and forth on the notes, and the prosecution is saying, well, this person answered this way, and the defense is saying, no, they answered the other way, and the prosecution won't give it up. And even the judge agreed with the defense at that time, saying, yes, they answered it this way. They're arguing over the way these people answered their questions because they're trying to prove a bias that isn't there. They're upset because they didn't get their questions answered. They didn't do a good job at asking their questions. They didn't get the answers that they wanted. And so now they're saying that there's 2 different types of bias, and we might not get our picks. So here we go back into the courtroom. We'll see what she's come up with now that she's had time to make phone calls and decide how she's going to answer this to make sure she doesn't get herself into trouble.
He said twice there's a level of deception taking place here.
One of the defense attorneys twice said there's a level of deception here with some of the answers with some of these jurors, and that's why they striked them. A gut feeling. And she's saying, oh, that's not enough. Well, if we're sitting there and you're lying to me and I have a gut feeling and I want you off, why is that not enough? Why do we have to explain our strikes? I have never in my life had to see this, and I don't think anyone else has. So we're about to go back in and find out what the final decision, if we get. All right, so we just got finished with jury selection for the Bundy trial retrial, and let me tell you, they have officially rigged this jury. We might as well live in the Soviet Union. They rigged this in advance. There was a motion that they filed that stated that we were going to try to keep males and ethnic people off of the jury. And so what they did is they used 8 of their 10 strikes to strike women. And we used 7 of 14 to strike men. And then there was 4 ethnic strikes, and there was a lot of ethnic people. We had to go through every single strike and explain why. And they didn't accept the explanation for 5 of those strikes. So they took those 5 strikes away from the defense and left all of the prosecution strikes. When the defense lawyers motioned to to object to their strikes and let them explain all of their strikes for the same bias. They claimed gender bias and racial bias on us, so we claimed gender bias on them. The judge said, no, they don't need to do that. There was an explanation. She didn't even answer what our defense lawyers said. She moved it around to something else, and it was like, explain your question again. There was 22 women, so they picked a third men versus women. They only pulled 2 men off. And they used 8 out of 10 on women, 80%. But they used a different mathematical equation to say that that was because there was more women left in the jury pool, and that's the entire jury pool of what was left to take. That's not bias for them, but they didn't have to explain any of theirs. So it left in the end with the prosecution having 10 strikes and the defense only having 9 strikes. It is rigged. The U.S. filed these motions weeks ago with this plan to get equal peremptory strikes. Normally this starts with 10 for the defense and 6 for the prosecution, but because there's extra people, they ruled that they gave extra strikes, so they also gave extra strikes to the prosecution. They said that the defense lawyers tried to exact the exact same jury as last time. They said, how could we possibly do that when there's 2 less people, which means we have, 4 less strikes, and they have 4 more. So how is that mathematically possible? But that doesn't matter, because the judge is allowed to stop what she's doing, go back into her office, figure out everything the possible way that she can to make sure that she stacks this for the prosecution. This case, the government filed a motion weeks ago to get equal strikes, and since they couldn't do that, the judge couldn't do that because it would show her bias. Instead, they did this facade like they did inside today. Then today, after the jury selection, the government made a motion based on Boston versus Kentucky, alleging this gender and racial problem upstairs. This motion was supposed to be for prosecutors. It's a claim that prosecutors normally try to get African American males off the jury, and that if they're to strike one, they have to explain why. But now, today, what they're doing is they're using that against the defense to make sure that they can do. So it's not enough that we can't defend ourselves. It's not enough that they've filed and they've granted everything that the government wants and nothing that the defense wants. They won't even give a verbal argument to our verbal argument. They just go off on a tangent that has nothing to do with what the argument from the defense is. And I don't see how we're getting a fair trial inside. This is not going to be a fair trial. This is a facade. This is a show. It is unbelievable. There are no checks and balances. I don't see, I've never heard, I keep coming out here and I say, I've been shocked for the last time. And I'm going to say it today. I've been shocked for the last time, but I'm sure on Monday there'll be something else to be shocked about. What is happening here is a travesty. This is un-American. This is not how our judicial system works. And, on top of that, I was taken outside. I was reprimanded and told that if I mouth something or look at the defendants and do something again, I will be removed from the courtroom for the entire duration of the trial. This is the first time I've been talked to during this trial, and he used his big giant voice, "You in the hallway." Guess who else was in the hallway? All the prospective jurors that were sitting in the hallway. Instead of doing it in between the two rooms or in between the two doors, no, they bring me out in front of the jury.
Your boss?
They bring me out in front of the jury to reprimand me out there. Then they follow me inside. They follow me inside and they do the same thing. I don't know where I left off, but they brought me out into the hallway and they reprimanded me in front of the prospective jurors. They were giving me a big speech and told me that I would not be allowed back in this courtroom for the duration of the trial, and they were very harsh with me. Then they followed me back inside and talked to a lady next to me that had her 6-year-old daughter there with her, who has been there perfectly angel the entire time. They scared that 6-year-old child for so long that she was trembling in another person's arms because they were trembling in her arms because she was afraid that her mother was going to be hurt. And she said, "Cover my ears so that I don't hear my mother getting hurt by these people." This is so ridiculously wrong that they take me out into the hallway, but then they continue to come back with 2 marshals and do this in the courtroom. Why couldn't they do mine in the courtroom? Because they wanted me out in front of that jury. They then harassed the lady about food in the courtroom, about a Tic Tac and gum, and the prospective jurors come back eating cake and cell phones going off as they come back in. So tell me, where is the check and balances? Where is the fair trial? Who is going to show up? These marshals say, if you've got a problem, you can come to me. I will make sure that law happens, but they didn't. They didn't stop that juror with eating cake in the courtroom. They didn't do any of that. They took me out in front of the jury and did that to me. And why did they do that? Because of my last live stream. The second we were done with that last live stream, we went inside and were harassed by the marshals. And we are going to be harassed by the marshals every single day in there from now on out. And I can guarantee it. And this is just ridiculous. I'm upset and I'm frustrated and I don't know what to say, because we might as well be facing a firing squad. There is no justice here, and there will be no justice.
How far?
Turn it off.
How far?